One of Lisa's friends said that that burst of music that we had might have been Carol truly visiting us and playing a little prank on us, so we'll take that as such. I do a meditation or a homily or a sermon, whatever you wish to call it, when I do a memorial service, when I do a celebration of life. And I like to title them with words that I think represent the person. So the title of my meditation comes from a card that Carol sent to me when I was ordained as a Unitarian Universalist minister. She said that I was touched by the divine and I walked the way of the heart. And I say of Carol, you were touched by the divine and you walked the way of the heart. This morning I want to focus on Carol's amazing life as someone who was touched by the divine and who diligently walked the way of the heart. Sometimes her way of the heart was filled with great sorrow and anguish, and at other times with great joy and celebration. I also want to speak to something that many of you have experienced, how tender she was in tending her relationships, all of her relationships, those most intimate to her, her husband, her children, her grandchildren, but also her friendships. I met Carol at Pine Rest Christian Hospital, as Ron said, many years ago, we won't go into the details, where we both worked as psychiatric nurses. And our friendship is one of the most enduring friendships that I have, aside from my roommate from college, who beat Carol out by about 3 years. Friendships, as with other intimate relationships, go through phases. Carol and I began as mentor and mentee. I was a very green psychiatric nurse. I was fresh out of nursing school, 1 year of medical surgical nursing, and deciding to focus on my passion, which was psychiatric nursing, but I didn't know what I was doing. So Carol took me under her wing as a neophyte psychiatric nurse, and she helped me learn the transformative art of therapeutic relationship, of truly connecting human to human to our patients. She had a special heart for the very vulnerable of our world, those with severe mental illness, the elderly, children. I have this painting of Carol. I don't think we have it here, but it's of a stooped woman, and she's carrying a basket of strawberries, and she's bending over and offering it to a small child who is looking up in anticipation and delight. The painting is one of my most treasured and prized possessions. It beautifully represents Carol's way of being in the world, due in part to Carol's rich foundational teaching in mental health nursing. I went on to specialize in that field for my first career, and I treated children and adolescents for over 26 years as a therapist. Carol was a marvelous teacher, and in many subjects, nursing, painting, buying antique furniture, scoring estate sale finds, and the fine craft of finding treasures at garage sales. And boy, she and Ron knew which ones to stop at and which ones not. I went with them once and they'd look and they'd just sort of look at it as we were coming, nope, not a good one, passed on. So they were great. Many of you here were probably her students of one of those subjects or others that I have not mentioned. Carol gave me further instruction in how to lovingly connect with people, especially with children, by sharing her stories of being Granny M. She created a library mouse. I loved what she did with Putty. I believe I got the name correct. Yeah. Okay. Putty was a mouse. She had a little house for him, and the children could leave letters to Putty. And they would often write letters of thanks, of joyful, they'd draw pictures, but sometimes they would leave more deep letters about some of their worries and their concerns. And Putty, through Carol's tender heart, would answer those letters the next week, and they would all come eagerly to see what was in the mailbox for them. Carol quickly moved from being my mentor to being a beloved friend. She invited me to stay in her home several times for a summer job, and then when I was pursuing further education in the Western Michigan area. She welcomed me into her family of 2 children, Lisa and Chad, and we had great times romping around on Morningside, correct? Okay. Morningside Drive. I developed a dear friendship also with Lisa over the years, and that's one of Carol's gifts to me, is that I have another spiritual companion to walk with me, while Carol can only do that in the spiritual way anymore. I promised Lisa I'd try not to be blubbering up here, so I'm working at it. One of our favorite traditions, I kind of got brought into the family, was that we would go out hunting for a Christmas tree. And so Carol would put a little something in a flask to keep the adults warm. And we would gather up the kids and we'd set off to Indian Joe's farm. Now, Joe was not a Native American, and he drank too much, but he sold all of his trees, regardless of their size, for $5. We knew Carol always loved a bargain, so of course she would go to Indian Joe's. And she loved eccentric folks, so it was perfect. So a number of years we trucked out to Indian Joe's, up the muddy road to his farm with anti-government signs, and we would score a bargain Christmas tree. Our early friendship centered around supporting one another as single women trying to find healthy relationships with a life partner. Yes, there were some evenings at local drinking establishments, but we always had each other's backs. She happily married Ron many years ago and gained a whole wonderful extended family and his children and grandchildren. So that chapter of searching together ended. She always cared, though, very deeply about my search for a life partner and wanted to know how it was going, and she would also offer sage advice when she thought I was going in the wrong direction. After her children had grown, she introduced me to her beloved granddaughter, Jura. When Jura was about 5, I was staying with Carol and Ron, so I could do a student internship as a chaplain at Bronson. Because Jura came weekly to spend time with Carol and Ron, I got to know her too. What a treat. Jura, let's always fondly remember doing yoga on the dock at Ticklebelly Pond, with your grandma watching with delight from the house above. I believe your grandmother, Spirit, is watching over you still as you grow in your young adult life and raise a family, and I know there's a new baby that just recently came into your family, a little boy, and congratulations. Another profound and important focus of our friendship, as I've mentioned, were our spiritual journeys. Both of us gradually moved away from mainline Protestantism, and we joined each other in search for a spirituality that more authentically matched who we were as people, how we felt our souls worked, and our worldview. We informally studied Carl Jung and had many important conversations about his work and its connection to the soul. Many of those conversations occurred at the Episcopalian Monastery down in Three Rivers, where we would retreat several times a year with friends in tow, Lisa being there with us when she could pull away from graduate school. These were marvelous times of friendly communion, of sharing favorite books, spiritual insights, good meals, lots of communion in silence, and contemplative walks in the woods and snow. While on retreat, going to the Long Lake bookstore, I don't know if it's even in operation, it was an independent bookstore, was a delight for us. The small independent bookstore carried a large selection of Jung's books and ones written by others who studied Jungian psychology. To know Carol was to know of the many things that fed her soul, and this is just a short list. She loved the Sun magazine, poetry, especially the poet Mary Oliver, Fountain Street Church, the Quaker traditions of silence and finding light and the light of God especially in every person, and the divine feminine, and earth-based traditions of ways of honoring the divine. She deeply nourished her spirit by having a group of women who studied the divine aspects of God while they lived at Ticklebelly Pond, the feminine divine aspects of God. Carol was a person, as I've mentioned before, who could strip things down to their essence and find joy in small things. I have a picture of Carol lifting up leaves of lettuce when we were making salad one day at her house, and she is in praise of the lettuce, and she looks exquisitely joyful as she holds up that lettuce. And this poem by Mary Oliver, entitled Look and See, beautifully describes how much her spirituality derived from how present she could be in the immediate environment, and especially in nature. And this is Mary's poem. This morning at Waterside, a sparrow flew to a water rock and landed, by error, on the back of an eider duck. Lightly it fluttered off, amused. The duck, too, was not provoked, but you might say, was laughing. This afternoon, a gull sailed over our house, and he was casually scratching his tummy with one pink foot. Oh Lord, how shining and festive is your gift to us, if we only look and see. Carol once sent me a series of pictures, and I didn't have time to find them, or I would have brought them, but they were a series of pictures that she snapped at Ticklebelly Pond. She would sit and watch the fog rise off of the pond, and she would take pictures. And she didn't know what she would see as the fog receded, but she would just keep snapping. And this particular morning, there was a goose on the pond, and she kept snapping and snapping, and finally that goose lifted off in glorious flight. To her, this was morning prayer, and it was better than any prayer ever written by any theologian. Carol was quiet and wise and wisely persistent. She was a wisely persistent cheerleader for those others that she loved and their development. I saw it as she nurtured nursing students that she taught. I saw it as she urged those with mental health challenges to reach for healing and belonging, as she encouraged her children to develop to their full potential as human beings. She delighted in my choice of leaving nursing and entering seminary to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. She and Ron honored me with the gift of coming to my seminary graduation. I loved visiting with her after she took up painting, and hearing of her adventures in refining her art and seeing her art change over the years. She painted with her soul, and her images are often soulful, and sometimes there is a dark quality to them, her nephew was sharing to me, but that's because she believed deeply that our soul is made of shadow and light, and that shadow and dark are not to be feared, but there's great growth in shadow and in the darkness. Think of seeds that must lie in the dark earth to be able to pop up. She painted with her soul, and this quote I think she sent to me, it's a Picasso quote, "Art washes away the dust of the soul." And Art Prize, as many of you probably know, was one of her very favorite events to attend. Carol painted an image of an old lady walking with her cat behind her. I think she has a cane, and she's walking toward a door, and through the door you see sunlight. But all around her it's gray. And that's a picture that was on the invitation that was sent to you. And I think that that represents how Carol saw darkness and light playing in our life, and that we as humans are complex enough and strong enough to hold all of that. And later, after the service, if you haven't had a chance, I invite you to come by and look at her paintings. It was also a joy to learn of the friends that she painted with. These were truly spiritual times for her. And she was doing two things that she loved when she was doing that. She was with friends that she dearly treasured, and she was painting. And sometimes there was a little bit of wine shared at those painting sessions. A playful image that emerged from Carol from one session is a martini glass with the cherry on the outside of the glass, hanging over the edge. And I said, Carol, what is the title of this? She says, oh, something like art after a few glasses of wine. She was also very intentional about facing her death. Evidence, her beautiful brochure for this service that she did many years ago. She had her affairs in order. She had very clear advance directives about what her family was to do if there was a catastrophic medical event. And as a chaplain, I know how important and what a gift of love those directives are to families. So if there's anybody sitting here, young or old, who hasn't completed them, I strongly urge you, and Carol would too, to do that. So your family doesn't have to deal with the sadness of you possibly leaving them and then make decisions when they don't know what your wishes might have been. Carol, because she gave this gift to Ron and Lisa, they knew what she wanted after she suffered a massive stroke. And blessings upon Lisa and Ron for honoring her wishes and letting her go last December. I know it broke your hearts to do it. It broke mine to hear it. And I know there was nothing else that you could have or would have done in that situation, out of the great love that you had for Carol and the great respect you had for her. You did some of the hardest spiritual work humans are ever asked to do. Thank you. Carol made a bucket list, and she did many of the lists on that item. Some were big, some were small things. One of the grand things that she wanted was to rent a beach house on the ocean. And so she rented a house on North Captiva, the western shore of Florida. And Lisa and I and Carol went for a week. And we were all a little nervous about how three strong, independent women were gonna fare in a house together for a week. At first I thought, I can't go, I can't afford it. And then I thought about Carol, who was 11 years older than me. And I thought, I can't afford not to go. And so we went, and we had a wonderful, wonderful week of companionship and contemplation. And we did this wonderful thing together at the end of the evening. We would sit in meditation for a period of time, just quiet. And then we would share at least 3 things that we were grateful for. And that was a wonderful end to our day. And it really wrapped that, nature wrapped it as a spiritual adventure, but that practice also added to that. Mindfulness and gratitude were essential to her spirituality. Carol, Lisa, and I highly recommend these 2 practices to you, mindfulness and gratitude. It's an antidote to how hard and harsh and broken our world feels today. As the poet Mary Oliver wrote in the poem Mindfulness, every day there are things that more or less will kill you. Pay attention to those things with delight. They will kill you with delight. Watch for those. Try to lose yourself inside the soft world. Let it instruct you over and over in joy and acclamation. And oh, good scholars, all of you here are students. We never stop being students, right, Ron? Ron was a superintendent and teacher for many, many, many years. So learn, oh good scholars, to say to yourself, how can I help but grow wise with such teachings as these, the untrimmable light of the world? And I've often thought of Carol since her death in these words, and I'll share these in closing, of the poet and the songwriter, Carrie Newcomer. Carol, you are an unquenchable spirit, a heart of light. You were called to make more than an appearance. You were invited to show up with your truest self, with your deepest you, awake and uncovered, even at the risk that such intentional wholeness implies. Thank you, Carol, for so diligently walking the way of the heart and inviting so many of us to journey with you. You were truly touched by the divine, and all of us who knew and loved you are so much better for our friendships and our love relationships with you. We love you, we miss you terribly, and we believe your spirit, your unquenchable spirit of life, will never leave us. Namaste, amen, and may it be so. We're going to move into a time for you all to share. And if you're comfortable using a mic, I can bring that around to you. I would encourage you to put the mic close to your mouth, almost as if you're licking a lollipop, so that you can actually project with it. But before we do that, let us take a moment and rest in the spirit of life with this prayer. Shall we pray? Spirit of compassion and comfort, today we come to celebrate the fullness of Carol's life. We come to express our deep and abiding gratitude that she lived and graced this world and countless people with her gentle, wise spirit, her kindness, and her amazing artistic gifts. Tender spirit of life, we come to ask for the gradual healing of our hearts, broken open by our deep grief over Carol's leaving. We ask for special tenderness, comfort, and peace for Carol's beloved family. Ron, her husband and companion through thick and thin. Lisa, her devoted and beloved daughter. Chad, her beloved son. Jura, her precious granddaughter. And Gwen, her caring sister. Bless too all of Ron's family, his children, his grandchildren, who became dear to her as well. Carol had many, many friends who cared deeply for her and for whom her loss leaves a big void in our heart. Bless us with your tenderness and wisdom in finding ways to carry on Carol's legacy of being an instrument of peace and kindness in our fractured, difficult world. Spirit of everlasting love, we are relieved that Carol's struggle with an aging body that was failing her in anguishing ways is over. Our faith in a spirit of benevolent mystery beyond this mortal life tells our hearts that Carol has been received into the great heart of God. where there is no pain, no fear, and no suffering, only amazing love and joy and light. We are grateful that Carol is now at peace. We are, however, often not at peace over her death. So we ask for a peace beyond understanding to slowly work its way into our hearts and minds. Bless us and help us as we remember and honor Carol with our stories and memories. Amen. I would first invite family to share their memories, and I will bring the microphone to you unless you prefer to come up to the front. So, who would like to start?